You're walking home one night and you have this strange feeling, as if, perhaps, you're not alone, like there's something or someone walking behind you. You think you hear something, but there's nothing there. It's probably just your mind playing tricks on you, right? Wait a second, you know what it is. A Beto-san. He's creepy to be sure, but he's harmless. Suddenly your walk gets a little lighter and that eerie feeling gets a little less eerie and a little easier to stomach. Or maybe it freaks you out and you decide to run home instead. Beto-san is a yokai. But what exactly are yokai? They're the eyes peering at you as you try to fall asleep at night. They're demon-like ogres who are both feared and honored. But yokai are not necessarily demons because they're not necessarily bad. They're the baku, a tapir-like creature that feeds on nightmares. They're enchanted household objects like umbrellas and teacups. Yokai are at the heart of Japanese folklore and modern Japanese pop culture, and they're in a great deal of Japanese media that Westerners consume nowadays, like Pokemon, for example. And the word yokai is a bit difficult to wrap your head around at first, because it seems to embody a lot of different words we have in English for our various mythical things. But Michael Dillon Foster, in his great book on Japanese folklore, The Book of Yokai, clarifies things a bit. In a sense, yokai is nothing more than a convenient label to indicate a whole range of otherwise ineffable experiences that might, in English, be translated with the words spirits, goblins, phantoms, specters, sprites, shapeshifters, demons, fantastic beings, numinous occurrences, the supernatural, and perhaps most commonly today, monsters. This is the benefit of a word like yokai. It can mean a whole lot of different things, and yokai can have a whole bunch of different relationships and interactions with human beings. And this vagueness is going to make a little bit more sense soon. Let me introduce you to the kappa. The kappa is one of the most famous yokai. It's a green creature with webbed hands and feet, a turtle-like shell and beak, and hairy, monkey-like arms. And what exactly does it do with this superhuman strength? Well, if a child in your village had recently drowned in a nearby river or pond, you might say that it was dragged in by a kappa. It also acted as an analogy for parents and other elders to use with children in order to keep them safe from a very real threat. If you're not careful around the water, you might get drowned by a kappa. But the kappa have some weaknesses too, and in true yokai fashion, they're rather silly. They love to sumo wrestle, and with their superhuman strength, you're unlikely to beat them, unless, before the match you bow. They'll bow in return, losing water from the head dish in the process, and losing their superhuman strength. But if you haven't quite gotten to the sumo match part, and they're, trying to actively drag you into the water, you can defend yourself with flatulence. What I've painted here is a very condensed and specific image of the kappa, but like most yokai, this image of the kappa didn't really start to take form until the 16th century. Kappa have existed in Japanese folklore for over 1,000 years, but mainly in oral traditions and under many different names and imagined forms. They certainly weren't the cute, lovable creature they are today. See, the funny and slightly frightening thing about looking back in history is the farther back you go, the more convoluted the myths become, the more fact and fiction blend together. And in pre-modern Japan, yokai were formless, unknown demons meant to be taken very, very seriously. Dial things back to over 1,000 years ago. It was thought that on particularly ominous nights, the realms would intersect and oni, or demons from the other realm, would slip through the cracks and enter our world. On these nights, townspeople would be instructed by the Bureau of Divination to stay inside and board their doors in order to stay safe from the Hyaki Yagyo, the night procession of 100 demons. These oni were not the goofy cartoon yokai of future centuries. It was said that if you were even to look upon them, it would be fatal. The origins of the Hyaki Yagyo are scattered and mysterious, but in days long ago, it was seen as a matter of life and death. While the Hyakyagyo was once considered extremely dangerous, this started to change in the following centuries, as scrolls and other art forms started to visualize these once only imagined demons, and Japan entered the Edo period. The Edo period stretched from 1600 to 1868, and it was a time of relative peace for a relatively unified Japan who had just spent over 100 years warring between themselves. This newfound peace and comfort led to more leisure time and a more standardized and visualized culture, but oral storytelling still had its place. Imagine this, it's a hot summer night in Japan, and you and your friends are looking for something to cool you down. Perhaps a shiver down your spine. And this is the idea behind Hyaku Monogatari, or a gathering of 100 creepy stories, which was a popular parlor game in the Edo period. The idea is that you'd light 100 lanterns, and then you'd take turns telling scary stories, and after each story, you'd put one of the lights out. In a time long past, a young woman fell in love with a monk who promised to marry her when he returned from his pilgrimage. When he returned, he not only refused to marry her, but laughed at her for being so naive. In her resentment, she transformed into the Kiyohime, a serpent-like monster, and sought revenge. The other monks tried to hide the man inside the bell of Dojoji Temple, but Kiyohime sniffed him out, snaked up the temple walls, rattled on the bell with her serpent-like tail, and melted the bell, burning him alive. There is a yokai which lives not in the wooded wilderness or the city streets, but in the very homes that we live in. This is the Makura Gaishi, or the pillow flipper. Legend has it that if you wake up in the middle of the night and find your pillow has been flipped to the other side, it was the work of the Makura Gaishi. That's not as scary as I was expecting, but still creepy. One night in the odd in-between hours of twilight, a man was walking on a forest path alone when he saw a flaming object approach him, and as it neared him, he realized that it was rolling on the ground, and he knew it to be the Wanyudo, or wheel monk. He glanced upon the yokai, a monk's head fixed on a flaming wheel, but before he could divert his gaze, the monk caught his eye, and in that moment, stole his soul from his body. The man collapsed to the ground, and his soulless corpse was found the next day. The idea behind this game is that if you tell enough scary or strange stories, you'll invite the presence of a creepy yokai, and once you put the last lantern out, something scary or strange is certain to occur. That was pretty scary, but it's a good thing that visual art started to blossom in the Edo period, and artists like Toriyama Sekien started bringing those once abstract phantoms to life. In his books, Sekien cataloged the previously unseen yokai of previous Japanese oral traditions, and many yokai scholars agreed that he also created some new ones of his own. With Sekien's seminal black and white prints and other prominent illustrations from the time, the once scattered and invisible yokai started to assume form. It wasn't just about visualizing, it was also about collecting and cataloging, sort of the encyclopedia-ification of yokai. The Edo period saw the creation of woodblock prints, hand scrolls, and cheap black and white printed books for popular consumption. This, combined with Sekien's influence, led to a yokai explosion. Now the Hyakyagyo and the number 100 had a new feeling. Instead of monumental danger, they represented a joyous, chaotic splendor of creepy creatures. To illustrate just how far these visualizations of yokai had penetrated culture, take a look at this 1807 book, The Monster Takes a Bride, which shows the standard rituals leading up to a wedding, but with one obvious change. All the characters are yokai. And you might notice that not all of these yokai are monsters or creatures, but enchanted everyday objects as well. These are tsukumogami. Understanding the tsukumogami is a useful window into understanding Japanese culture, namely the belief in animism. All entities have a spirit, not just humans or foxes, but even inanimate ones. The lore behind tsukumogami is that if an object lives to 100 years, it will gain a spirit and become a yokai. There's the biwa boku boku, an anthropomorphic biwa, which is essentially a Japanese lute. There's sandals, cooking pots, lanterns, and in true yokai fashion, the list goes on as far as the human imagination can go. During the Edo period, yokai like the kappa, which were once invisible, regional, varied, and mysterious, became iconic. By the 20th century, yokai had lost a great deal of their mystery and danger, and had become more of a culture-wide exercise in creativity. Just as Sekien did with his seminal books on yokai, artists in the 20th and 21st century have been painting yokai in new forms and have been creating new yokai completely. The greatest example of this is manga artist Mizuki Shigeru, who revitalized Japanese yokai culture with his manga Gegege no Kitaro. The manga follows the part human and part yokai main character of Kitaro, who acts as a sort of bridge between yokai and humans. Centuries-old yokai had found new forms as familiar, if not slightly malicious friends. Kitaro was massively successful in Japan, and the late Shigeru has become a modern-day celebrity. Movies in the 60s and onwards like 100 Monsters and The Great Yokai War show yokai not strictly as enemies, but as allies as well. Yup, especially the kappa, who has completed its transformation from dangerous river creature to lovable cutesy mascot and lovable ally. In fact, the friendly nature of yokai has shifted so completely that they've become mascots and staples of advertising. The tanuki, a once mischievous prankster of a yokai, now greets visitors at shop fronts all around Japan. Studio Ghibli films play on pre-existing yokai like tanuki and kitsune in the film Pompoko, and director Hayao Miyazaki is well known for taking influence from a yokai-steeped culture to create the original monsters and spirits that assemble his most popular film, the global hit Spirited Away. And this is the point where yokai spilled out of Japan and started to sweep across the entire world. Well, more accurately, that happened 10 years prior with the global hit that was and is Pokemon. Wait, Pokemon? Like, Pokemon? With the help of a little internet sleuthing, I realized these Pokemon, these cards and these games and these characters, which I'd spent an entire childhood playing with, were partly based on yokai. Partly would be an understatement. The Pokemon Ninetales is based on the nine-tailed kitsune, a fox spirit, with each tail representing 100 years that the kitsune has been alive. Lombre is a kappa, Raichu is a Raiju, and so is Raikou. Drowsy is a Baku, and for the cherry on top, Voltorb is an enchanted Pokeball. Fast forward to 2016 with Pokemon Go, when Pokemon were literally, well, digitally, crawling the streets of every continent. This was one of the coolest parts of learning about yokai. It started as an exploration into the folklore of a country thousands of miles away from me, only to realize that I'd had a little piece of yokai in my life for as long as I can remember. But even though yokai have changed, and it seems like logic has dispelled the darkness around the strange occurrences of their creation, there's still a place for the yokai of centuries past. Those invisible, unknowable yokai of centuries past. That and, well, it's just fun every once in a while to send a shiver down your spine. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, you can support me over at Patreon at the Magnus Commonplace. You'll get access to exclusive articles, early sneak peeks of projects I work on with my company, River Magnus, as well as your name right here in the credits. Thank you to Aaron Patel, Rita McPhail, and Anonymous Poet for your patronage. I'll see you in the next one.